Right, so my name is Katindi, and I was asked to speak about Africa's future scenarios and on issues related to church, business, and value-based education. And so I just really didn't talk about Africa's funding or what is happening in the education system, but much more the issues around what are some of the things we need to prepare for in the education sector, or what we must be preparing to teach for. And so I work in a consultancy firm, and as you've been told, I'm a futurist. So let me, just looking at the next few years, if you think about Africa in terms of population, I think it's a no-brainer that we have quite a number of young people. Just to tell you that in terms of the population and how it's going to be growing, we have around, by 2030, the working age population will have increased 1.5 times. So youth unemployment right now in Kenya is at 40%, and in a lot of countries in Africa. And so you can see that as we move along to 2045 and to 2060, the numbers of young people that need to be employed that will contribute to the working age population will grow even more. So that by 2060, you're talking about almost 3 times. And so we need to be creating employment in a much faster rate than we are doing. And but I think that what we are prescribing is not working very well. So that has implications on some of the value choices that young people are making. And if you think about looking at Africa's human capital, even just by the quality of them, that, so we are having under-education or uneducated, at least a quarter are uneducated, another a quarter in the 21st century, to a third are malnourished. And then, of course, there's a lot of overpopulation in urban areas. But when you think about the spatial distribution of Africa, we have underpopulation. It's just that we're not planning our cities very well. And so maybe that's something to look into as we think about these numbers of young people that need something to be doing. The social structures are also spiking demands for several things like water, housing, food, and that competition is also making young people make very interesting value choices. And then, as you can see, the issues about income distribution, if you think about Africa's inequality, a few people have, many more don't have. But when you think about this supply and demand for jobs and for earnings, that's again another peculiar place we need to be looking into. And so maybe the question to ask is, what are the implications of that? And the first one I talk about is this neoliberal economic models. And basically, just this capitalism and what it has introduced in the value-based system of our children. And what we are seeing is that there's a lot of consumerism, and I'll talk about that later. But in Africa, we are shackled by deep-seated inequalities. Our states are very fragile, and of course, corruption is very high. There's global recession, and as you would know, that is affecting a lot of trends, including funding. Destitute people, we have many more people that have now fallen back into the poor bracket, first of all, because of COVID. In Africa, you are just one disease away from poverty. The issues about debt and scarce gainful employment. So we have many more people now getting into that category by the virtue that we have more dependency because the young people that should be working are not working. So another thing we're observing is that among young people, there's what we are calling fractured, frozen, and failed transitions. And what that means is that those transitions in Africa are taking longer among young people. And whereas, so for example, in other countries, you'll hear youth ends at 24 or at least 29. In Africa, that age bracket has moved to 34 because of these delayed transitions. And then another peculiar thing about Africa that is informing the value system is the fact that we are living in 3, I don't know whether I can call them dispensations at the same time. So whereas in Western countries, people moved from the agrarian to the industrial, and now we are in the knowledge, we are having the 3 of them coexisting hand in hand. The agricultural, and yeah. So we have the agricultural, sector, which is sort of like the agrarian, and has a lot of informal employment and rural agricultural work, and that's about 60 to 70% in Africa. Then you have the issues around industrialization, which hasn't grown very well, and yet in Asia, that's what has been providing employment and absorption of young people. And then you have the knowledge economy. And so that way we have a lot of distortions. And allow me to just skip a few of these things and just go straight into some of the interventions we are having. So because of that coexistence and because of the desperation that African governments are having to catch up with the population, we prescribed different things to young people so that they can get employment. So there's an entrepreneurship track, but what we are calling entrepreneurship is very different from the results we are getting. So we are, in a sense, planning for and preparing for the informal. So we are sort of like loaning young people to start small informal businesses. And those businesses are not viable in terms of whether it's creating a livelihood, at least at the aspirations that young people need. And basically, not every young person wants to be in that sector as well. But that's the main sort of like prescription for youth unemployment. Then there's the education track. So we provided free education, but the problem with that is that we are creating a mass of young people that are relatively well educated. And this group, if you do a psychoanalysis of what happens when you have a group of young people that are relatively well educated and unemployed, it is more potent for criminal gangs or for crime than when you have a population of illiterate people. So my sense is that African governments need to think about policies that increase the access to education to at least high school and at least tertiary levels. Then obviously the employment track, we seem not to be absorbing them in that track quite fast. The financing track is where you give them loans. Statistics show that 70 to 80% of those, actually not 80% of those small businesses die before their second birthday, and very few survive after that. So again, that we are losing a lot of money through that, and we are not, young people are still not gaining the kind of employment that they need. And so the prescriptions we have, like I said, are inadequate. Now, the interesting thing then is that there's a lot of disruptions that are also going on. Allow me to show you something that I think is at the core of the issues around values and what we should be training for. And there's a question of dissonance between youth and the work identities, realities, and aspirations. And what I mean by this is when we talked about the agrarian, the industrial and the modern economy, it's what we are saying is that because of technology and because of rising globalization, what's happening is that these young people, with all their, can I say, lack of privileges or what we call deprivations, whether it's, modern living and so forth, they are in this deprivation, but because of technology, they can see what life could be. And so what's happening is that in their minds, they desire so much more for themselves, but the realities they live in are so bad. And so what then that means is that we are creating a group of very volatile young people, whether you think about mental health, whether you think about the actual money that they have in their pockets. And so they aspire the lives of modern living, but they are in these two circumstances here, most of them. And so that dissonance is creating several things. This is just, if we had time, we probably would go through this, but it is the different, realities of those three groups living in the same community. But in the end, you're creating something that is called globalization. And globalization is whereby you have localized, you have local realities, but global aspirations. And this aspirational gap is bringing a lot of it has what we call an inflammatory effect. Whether it's on young people, they're not having very good coping mechanisms. When it comes to, for example, ethics, they want to get rich quick because they want to desperately get out of this local situations to go into these globalized aspirations. And these globalized aspirations, again, because of social media, they are very exaggerated. So you find young people saying, I want to own a plane, or nothing wrong with that aspiration. But if you're in, for example, Kibera or a village that, I mean, you haven't even started walking the steps, you can imagine that gap that they have to fill in. And because it can't come quickly in reality, they fall into all manner of traps. So one of them is corruption. And just to give you an example, I did the same experiment in Kenya, in Nigeria, and across other African countries. When you ask anonymously, unanimously, is corruption bad? 99% tell you yes. If you reframe the language and ask, for example, if you're to be given a bribe or incentives by a politician to elect them, would you? They say, of course I would. I will take it, because that's not corruption. That is facilitation fees. And so what's happening is that we are now, and young people have become very good in this. We don't have black and white. A lot of things have become gray so that they survive, the circumstances that they are in. And because of that, then we are not defining or redefining what is right and what is wrong. And so many people find themselves, including young Christians, not able to make the decisions that they ought to in terms of values. And there's a great need for us to, as educators, to start thinking about how do we help young people in this regard. I mean, the second one is the whole issue about NCDs and this psychotic situations. This is just a graph with many things, but the green bars show what is anticipated by 2030. And you can see, for example, like the neuropsychiatric disorders are going to grow quite a lot in this regard, okay? And in fact, this is actually seen as an underestimation. Why? Because young people are now increasingly becoming extremely stressed, and they have very low coping mechanisms for the kind of challenges they are finding themselves in because of the globalization situation I talked about. And so if we are going to start, if we are going to really educate, and particularly the value-based education, we need to start equipping these young people to cope with the realities of the life they find themselves in. And we need to begin to ask ourselves, how will that education look like to build that kind of muscle? And I think I already talked about this, that when you have the kind of numbers we have, with the kind of unemployment we have, we usually, demographers say that 80% of civil conflicts happen in countries where 60% of the population is under the age of 30. Kenya, and largely in Africa, is actually 72, give or take in some of the regions. Like, Central Africa has a bigger percentage than East Africa. So, and the reason why we are finding young people, for example, getting caught up in transnational crime is to move away from their realities and go to their globalized aspirations. And part of that we, for example, think is doable. Something else that is very interesting is this whole global phenomena, and obviously capitalism, and the issue around, expenditure or, consumerism. And just to tell you that it's very peculiar that we have been saying and selling this narrative loudly that Africa has, what we call a middle class. But they actually did redefine what Africa's middle class is. And it's very different, for example, from the middle class in other places. So you find that in what they call middle class is those who earn $2, between $2 and $20 per day. If you do that per month, it probably will be around $6,000, okay? But, or 600, yeah, $600. But globally, what constitutes a middle class is those who earn about $20,000 and above. So this Africa's middle class is very watered down. And so people who are really poor people are also categorized as middle class. But the reason for this is that there's a narrative that goes hand in hand with this, that when you say Africa's middle class is rising, then you want to sell the idea that young people or the middle class, so to speak, can afford things. And so you start, this consumerism narrative. And because, again, of this globalization phenomena, young people are beginning to want, and there's nothing wrong with wanting, the fine things in life, you can afford them. But now they are going into debt to also keep up a front on that they are doing well, even when they're crumbling in reality. And so this is something to be worried about, because then again, they don't know how to balance between, having, whether a fake presentation of themselves, and that has been accelerated by social media. Again, one of the reasons why it is urgent that we prioritize value-based education is to be able to help young people to be real with themselves about where they are and who they are, and in terms of their identity. So let me skip this slide about what we are spending and so forth. But then to my last slide, I think this issues around mobile technology. I just finished writing a paper on, transnational crime and what media and technology is doing. And one of the things that we found out is that, obviously, especially in Africa, mobile technology is one of the biggest places that is now increasing and changing the dynamics of transnational crime. Why? Because you can be anonymous, you can encrypt a lot of these apps, and obviously you are able to transact across borders, unlike, traditionally where transnational crime was, you had to, go through airports with drugs in your system and things like that. So it's something that is getting out of hand. And as you can see, the proportions of people owning mobile phones was quite low in Africa, but you can see these are 2020 projections. But if you actually look at now, mobile phones in Africa, and even the advanced technology, mobile technology in Africa has surpassed many Western African countries. And it's used, you can see it's surpassing 100% in that regard. So, of course, what we are saying is that these are things to look out for, and no one is equipping young people to handle, mobile technology, and in a responsible way, and in a way that doesn't dupe them badly. So the other one I wanted to say is, this use of drugs and alcohol is a coping mechanism for young people. And one of the things that is now being used, and why long-term planning is quite important, even as we think about this value-based training, is because companies like, those who sell tobacco, this is a study that had been done a while back. And this company had been studying populations and asking, why aren't we able to sell tobacco, for example, in Africa? And they studied the demographics, they studied what's happening. And they found out that for Africa doesn't consume like the rest of the world. But it's because one cigarette, for example, would be shared among 3 or 4 people. So, and then they said the typical thing for us to do in the long range is to reduce the cost of cigarettes. But they're like, that's a traditional. What are the things we could do that are different to get, permanent clients and for a long time? And the strategy they came up with is, think about if you introduce alcohol or drugs before a certain age, and I'm told maybe 15, if I'm not wrong, it will be very difficult for these young people they are hooked for life, as opposed to if you introduce it, for example, when the young person is 16 or 17. And so that's the strategy they started using. And they said they're going to target the non-traditional, users of these things. And they realized that, of course, young women were an easy target, but some of the lowest users. And why is that? So they started selling these things as self-actualization. Remember the narrative we're talking about, consumerism. Remember the image creation we're talking about. Remember the globalization issue we are talking about. And so they started saying, okay, let's target the young African who is in campus. She wants, and sell the narrative of using these things will sell independence. It will sell class. It will sell, that you are posh. But if you hook them before 15, then you are hooked them for life. You hook them for life. And so if you notice these things about alcohol, drugs, cigarettes have been rising phenomenally in Africa because of such narratives and such targets. And obviously now, young people again are using those to numb the pain or the pain they feel because of not being gainfully employed. And so really what I'm trying to say is that we have a disaster in waiting. And we have people, a lot of young people who are now very dependent on these drugs and who are not functional unless they are, they're dysfunctional in many ways. Let me put it that way. But to finish then, I am saying that unless we are also then having a very strong counter narrative against the narratives that are being sent out there and equip our young people with the skills to handle all this technology, issue of resources, issues of globalization, we are really in a ticking time bomb. Now, and obviously we need to do our own long ranges about what will values look like or what can values look like and how can we spiritedly help these young people achieve the right value sets. How can we then help their faith to inform decision making? How do we counter this issue about the subtle art of manipulation in marketing and this graying of a lot of things so that it's neither black, neither white? Again, value-based education. Then expanding the failure quotient of young people. And one of the things I'm seeing, I have children who are 5 and 7, and one of the things, and I've been watching how they were performing during the different tournaments, and the entire class cannot handle being second. They all want to be number one. And they fall apart because no one is teaching them how to handle failure. And in this 21st century that is so convoluted, if our young people don't build the muscle to be able to survive crisis, we are in a sense, and that's why suicide rates are going up. And then I already said we need to develop counter narratives. And so these are some of the things that I thought I should surface when it comes to about value-based education, how important it is in Africa, and how it, in a sense, could begin to address some of the biggest crises we have in our continent and in moving forward. Let me stop there and say thank you. I hope it hasn't been so disruptive.
Thank you very much, Dr. Katindi. I hope you can hear the claps to say we have been able to hear you and we appreciate your